Stanley Bagshaw and the rather dangerous miracle cure. In Huddersgate, famed for its tram lines, up north where it's boring and slow, Stanley Bagshaw resides with his grandma at number 4, Prince Albert Row. Now, one morning at breakfast, Stan's grandma said,
"Stan, have you heard about Ted? I hear as he has had a mishap."
"Oh, crikey, what's happened?" Stan said. Old Ted was a good friend of Stanley's, who was patient and clever and kind, so as Gran told Stan what had happened, he could picture it all in his mind.
He was down by Cope's Pond spotting tadpoles, and had spotted 104 when he noticed a hole in the mud bank, what he had never noticed before. So he took off his shoes and his stockings and paddled across nice and slow, and was just bending down to have a close look, and a water rat bit his big toe.
"Did it hurt?" said our Stan, rather worried.
"It turned septic, and old Dr. Flynn sent him up to the outpatients' hospital, and the doctors up there kept him in."
Well, when Grandma had finished her story, she just carried on with her meal, but Stanley sat there, very quiet. He was thinking how Edward must feel. Old Edward was feeling much better, but he lay on his bed in the ward and stared up at a crack in the ceiling. He didn't feel ill now, just bored. He stared out of the hospital windows, down to the gardens below, and he wished he was out there with nature. At visiting times, he felt low. "I've brought you some flowers," said Stanley. "I hope you're not feeling too bad."
"Flowers for me?"
said Edward. "Stan, you're a good little lad." Edward put Stanley's flowers in a beaker and gave the young lad a boiled sweet, and said he'd told him some stories about nature, and said he'd been cheered up a treat. But visiting time was soon over. A nurse came in ringing a gong and announced, in a voice like a foghorn, "Time's up, everyone! Come along!" The visitors said goodbye quickly. They seemed anxious to get out the door, but Stanley gave Edward a cuddle, and then gave him 2 or 3 more. "Come on, if you please," said the big nurse. "My nurses and I must get on." By the time Stan was out in the corridor, the rest of the people had gone. "Which way do I go?" said Stanley. "Just follow the signs," the nurse said. "Do you think you'll be able to do that?" Our Stanley just nodded his head. But the signs were all rather confusing. The words looked all foreign to Stan. He decided he'd just have a wander about. And that's how the danger began. Because the corridors went on forever, it seemed, and each one looked the same as the next, and not one seemed to lead to the way out, and our Stan became rather perplexed. Then he came to a door marked "Theatre, Surgical Ward number 3. "I didn't know nurses did acting," thought Stan. So he opened the door just to see. Inside, there was lots of equipment and a couch with all lights overhead. It didn't look much like a theatre stage. It looked more like a sunbathing bed. "I am feeling tired," thought Stanley. "I've been wandering around for so long. This must be the visitors' restroom," he thought. But that's where our Stanley thought wrong. Sir George Oswald Nash, the eye surgeon, and Dr. Emmanuel Mason were in the next room getting ready for a dangerous eye operation. The doctor said, "What's the procedure?" Said Sir George, "Well, the boy is quite blind, so I'll pop his eyes out and then poke about in the sockets to see what we find." The doctor said, "Jolly good luck, sir. Do you think it will take very long?" "Well, these eye operations are tricky. I'm just hoping that nothing goes wrong." "The patient is here," said a staff nurse. Said Sir George, "Well, that's jolly queer. He's not due to arrive till 5:15. Said the nurse, "Yes, I know. But it's here." And there, on the table, lay Stanley. So pale, and so still, and so small. The doctors and nurses were all rather tense. But our Stan wasn't worried at all. Our Stanley was happily dreaming, and with the hospital lights beaming down, he was dreaming he was in a desert, on a sunbathing bed, getting brown. In his dream, a figure came slowly towards him, in a long white gown and a mask. "I suppose it could be an Arab sheik," thought Stan. "When he gets here, I'll ask." The surgeon advanced to the table. In his eyes there was deep concentration. He was feeling quite tense, about to commence a most difficult eye operation. But first he addressed his assistants. "There's one thing that must be understood. When I slice into his eyelids, there will probably be loss of blood." A student nurse said, "Ah," and fainted. "Leave her," he said. "She'll come round. I will now make the primary incision, and I want there to be not a sound." Then placing one hand on Stan's forehead, with the skill of a surgeon supreme, he got ready to cut, and would have done, but at that point Stan woke from his dream, and seeing the surgeon above him in a long white gown and his mask, said, "Excuse me, but are you an Arab?" The surgeon said, "No, why do you ask?" "He can see you, you fool!" said the staff nurse, and the surgeon cried out, "Glory be, I just placed my hand on his forehead, and now the wee chappie can see." They all danced around with excitement, shouting, "Whoopee and praise be to God, and oh, to be sure, 'tis a miracle cure," which seemed to our Stan rather odd. "How do you feel?" said the surgeon, "now that at last you can see?" "I feel a bit hungry," said Stanley. "Can I go home for me tea?"
"Have you had a nice time?"
said his grandma, when our Stan got home for his tea. "I've just been to visit old Edward," said Stan. "Nothing much ever happens to me." That's not quite the end of the story, because a little later from the radio we hear, "We interrupt this really boring programme on how to make an Huddersfield Albion football scarf to bring you a newsflash. A Huddersfield eye surgeon claims to have restored the sight of a blind boy by means of a miracle. Hospital authorities are unable to confirm this, however, as shortly afterwards, according to the surgeon, the patient disappeared. The surgeon has been ordered home to rest." A spokesman explained, "Sir George has been under a lot of strain recently. He seems to think he's an Arab." The end.